Hello, and welcome to part 6. Oh my god, section A. The last part, the first section. So this is not to extent the beginning of the end, because the live will be the end of this particular run of videos, but it's going to be a fun one. So, what do I want to say for this? Well, we are joined by an unexpected guest through in the course of these videos, so you're going to enjoy that. This one is slightly more wide-ranging. We're using well, to try and make this work, because this was the most unlikely, impossible scenario, really, in reality. We had to go a little bit more extreme than all the others. All the others have far more of a basis in terms of their origins. You can make a logical case for how they come about. You can stack up the evidence more or less reasonably. But that wouldn't have given a complete picture, and frankly, all the results come back the same way. In January 1939, Japan is not in a position that she would be in 1941. Britain is not in the position she would be in 1941. Britain is not in the position it would be later, 5 months later, in 1939, in January 1939. So this is a big thing. What, therefore, are we going to talk about? What, then, for are we doing? Well, this one is looking at, and to an extent it's orientated around, the idea that America joins the war against Britain. What is the one scenario where Japan really has a fighting chance? This one. The other question is, why would, if the situation was so stacked against Japan, they actually let the situation get to war? As I've said in answer to the previous questions, there is no wiser heads to prevail. There is no one who is powerful enough necessary to stop. Yes, Roosevelt might well try and arbitrate, but the other sides might well not listen. The things were fractures enough between America and Japan that they might not want to listen to him, even if it is in their best interest, because you have to remember, Japan has predicated its entire structure around the idea that even though it's smaller, it, through technical superiority and through, let's be honest, ignoring the treaties, can still achieve superiority over them. Plus, they know that Britain cannot afford to completely abandon the European theatre. There's only one scenario where they can really afford to abandon the European theatre, and that's if the Germans and the Italians come with them. To which there were a couple of people who commented, well, the Germans would probably need a refit, etc., for their engines if they did it. A, German surface raiders go plenty far that I'm for sure they're okay. And B, if you think the Royal Navy would worry about the cost of giving them a refit to make sure they were the other side of the world with them, away from UK, British home islands, you really don't understand quite how manipulative the Royal Navy's prepared to be for security. That would be nothing. That would be a case of, oh, Ren, you can't go without a refit. Well, we'll have one scheduled for Mumbai, Singapore. How about Sydney? In fact, we'll put you permanently in refit in the Far East if you fancy it. You can stay the whole time there. We'll pay for them all. There's also the concept of the ground war. Now, we haven't really got into a ground war because I honestly don't see it as as that much of a likelihood. Malaya campaign is a good example. What would have been the result of the Malaya campaign? Well, the nearest troops Britain has are armoured troops in the sitting in the North Africa region. It also has some troops sitting in India, Australia, all sorts of troops who are in position, who are closer to Singapore than they were in 1941 and could react there. And there are better troops in Singapore. There are more jungle trained troops available. One of the things you often miss in World War II is the fact that before the events of Malaya in 1941, you've had troops have to go all the way to fight in Europe, including Norway. You've then had troops had to be diverted to fight in North Africa. You've then had troops being sent to fight in Iraq and Iran to deal with pro-Nazi rulers, what were felt to be pro-Nazi rulers there, and to secure a trade route to Russia up through that route. A trade route which is often forgotten because it wasn't exactly the easiest to actually supply anything, but was actually fairly critical. So you have troops constantly being drawn out of this area, drawn away from the Far East, which was theoretically relatively stable. Yes, it was problematic, but it was felt that there were enough forces there to hold the region, and there wasn't an active war going on. So you also have a mixture of officers who are out there, who are not out there at this time. 1939, the mixture is different than it is in 1941. So that is why I do not foresee the Malaya campaign. Also, the Malaya campaign, when it's launched in 1941, the Japanese have been preparing for it for months. They've got all the resources stockpiled, they've got the personnel trained, they've got everything mapped out, everything organized well in advance, well planned. They don't have that scenario in this occasion. They don't have that advantage. Because war takes them unawares. It takes Britain unawares. It takes everyone unawares. But Britain has a couple of advantages of mobilization. It has a far larger merchant marine. It does have troops closer. It's not necessarily reinforce Singapore. You're not just talking about troops coming from Britain or ships from the Mediterranean. You're talking about ships coming from the Indian Ocean, from the South Atlantic, from the Mediterranean, from across from the West Indies, North American West Indies station, from Australia, troops and ships, from India, troops and ships. It would all be mobilized. In these days, we see the Commonwealth and the Empire as far more independent, whereas in this period they were far more interdependent. That was how they were bound together to an extent. There were the ties of culture and all these things, yes, but there was also an interdependency, especially in terms of security. They depended upon Britain, and that's how Britain structured it. Basically, empire is a protection racket. There's a reason America maintains the world's largest military. As we talk about its informal empire, the Empire of America, and all these things, well, it's a protection racket. This is what it is. America complains about providing protection and security for NATO, but that's why it has so much power and influence in Europe, because it does provide the protection and security of NATO. It's the same with the British Empire. So, I'm going to stop talking because otherwise the 50 minutes of video, which I'm going to do, I'm going to take is well and truly massively over the hour. But that's me trying to set up the grounds for this conversation, which is going to involve alien space bats. I kid you not. Alien space bats. And we are now recording. To avoid legal snags, please tell people that they're being recorded. Yay! Well,
yeah.
Recording. And hello everyone, and before we get into what is
the final one of the scenarios we're pre-recording for this, because I have worked out it will be many, many hours of video watching you have had, courtesy of Daniel's very kind, generous free time. As well as suggesting the question, he's also provided a huge amount of free time and selflessly gone and found some appropriate beer for the occasion.
Yes. Although, weirdly, and I'm wondering if coronavirus is to blame, cannot find Tsingtao beer in my little corner of southwest London for money. I mean, not necessarily love, although I do like it. So I have got Tiger beer, which is, well, it's actually brewed in the UK by Heineken, but it's a Singapore beer. So I've gone with a Singapore strategy.
My dad used to love that. There was one Chinese restaurant over in Isha, which is not far from where I think I live, or even you live.
Yeah.
And it's still there. And they serve both Tiger beer, which is brewed in the UK, and imported Tiger beer from Singapore.
Ooh.
They have the range. They're a big Chinese restaurant in Isha. And my dad used to always go for the imported because it reminded him of his time in Singapore, where he spent most of his time explaining to people why you didn't use a huge, great big diesel engine for a fisheries survey vessel. It didn't matter for the fisheries protection vessel, but for the fisheries survey vessel, for some reason, the very big, noisy diesel engine didn't work that well. And he was called in to fix the design because the design wasn't working. For some reason, it wasn't detecting any fish. I don't think that was the most complicated job my father ever worked.
Well, yes and no, because soundproofing a ship that's already been built is not that easy.
Luckily, they were building a second one, so he managed to change the engines for that, and then he had to work out the soundproofing of the first one.
Yeah.
So that's why they had one gas-powered and one diesel.
I have a friend who does soundproofing. It doesn't sound easy.
No. It's one of the choice. I've put this out on some of the videos already, but I've discussed this with Daniel. My current fantasy is getting myself an office so I don't have to work in my bedroom, as I'm going to be working from home, as we've been pretty much told by the university for the next 18 months, possibly as many as 2 years. They expect us to be doing a lot of lecturing, a lot of teaching from home. My theory is that at a certain point, it doesn't matter if coronavirus goes or not, that probably is going to stay in place, because universities are going to find that it's very much cheaper for them to convert most of their large lecture theatres, etc., to other purposes, or sell them off, and maintain a library, some social facilities, some labs, and a few limited lecture facilities for occasional lectures, than it is to carry on this continued lectural system, because you can teach people from your homes, and it's also therefore cheaper on staff because we only need to have shared offices for them occasionally in. Otherwise, we work from home. They can continue charging the same fees, and we're all elsewhere, so they don't have the same costs.
Well, the other thing is certainly, I only really know about medical schools. Apparently other university types exist, but I know nothing about them.
To be fair, I've taught history of medicine as well as history of engineering and history of all sorts of things in my time, because the cover for the lecturer who's supposed to do history of medicine was ill, so the history of engineering lecturer got called up and going, do you mind teaching this? Have you got notes? Yes, I'll give it a go.
Yeah. The group sizes have now exceeded the size of all the lecture theatres anyway. So they're putting students into secondary lecture theatres with video connections anyway.
Yeah.
So even if the students are all sitting in a lecture theatre, they're not necessarily getting talked to live. I think the big thing is going to be keeping the lectures live and not letting them change to pre-recorded lectures, which you will only have to give once, and then they can just trot out year after year.
Oh, you haven't worked out that one's coming.
No, I have worked out that one's coming.
Yeah.
I want that to be avoided.
I know. No, that's my cunning, my thinking behind a lot of these things. And another reason why I'm putting the efforts I am into writing books and into YouTube. So I have, in a nicest way, pay for when the university say they don't want to pay me anymore.
Yeah.
Because they've got a fair
campaign for real lecturing.
Yes. Anyway.
Yes.
It's fun times.
Yeah. The last thing before we get in, and we may need to edit some of this down, was to say
I'll leave it.
The T-shirt I wore in the earlier videos, which people were commenting on, which is Allergic to Idiots scar with the hyenas, is official Disney merch, which I bought from what I still, because I am actually, despite possible appearances, ancient, Euro Disney.
Fun.
Yeah. Had a brilliant time there, September of last year.
To be fair, the current debate going on is it's about how old you and I is going on in some parts of the Discord. And they're all estimating we're below 30, but I am the slightly older one.
Oh.
And I have been quite honest about my age.
I have no reason to lie.
Yeah, I'm the ancient 33.
I'm 39. Yeah, I left medical school. Actually, my graduation day was my 23rd birthday.
You see, what the thing is you and I have missed a trick, because my sister was born before me, but according to all her birthday cards, same with my mum's, they're only 21. Ah.
Well, I have my late grandmother lied to everyone about her age, to the point I'm not sure her hospital records were even right. And she kept, and the problem was she kept on claiming things, and it's like, but I know that you were born before World War I started. So, because one of the family stories is about how my genius family decided to go travelling across Europe in the summer of 1914.
Look, that's more acceptable than the people who've gone travelling in the middle of a coronavirus pandemic and then get upset when they find out they've been told they can't. They're going to be quarantined.
I feel sorry for those people, and what they really, really need to remember is this is not a vindictive thing. This is safety. This is nothing to do with you. This is nothing to do with the countries. This is nothing to do with punishing people for going on holiday.
Or politics or anything like that. It's just there's a global pandemic going on, and if you do take the risk, you might get away with it, but you also might find that there's been a spike in that country and the government's going to go, it's just... It's the risk you're taking when you do it. It's a risk versus reward equation, and if you have judged the reward is worth the risk, do it.
Yeah, and I'm really, really sorry for everyone, but yeah, the it's not being done to punish you, and it's just the same as if if you come into contact with somebody, you will be isolated for that reason as well, and told to isolate. But because that happens to individuals, no one cares. And because it's happening to holidaymakers, and we have journalists out there and things, and we have people bored and queuing where journalists can get access to them, they get interviewed. And so it makes news.
Yeah.
So
it always does.
Yeah, so very sorry to everyone about all of that.
I'm even having to be careful and sort of worried because my girlfriend lives the opposite end of the country from me, so I want to go visit her for her birthday, but I'm working out how I'm going to do that and avoid the areas which can be problematic in the country. And basically, my current plan is to manage to drive the entire distance without stopping anywhere.
Yes.
I'm not sure if my petrol tank can survive that long, so I might have to factor in at least one petrol station. But leaving that to one side, getting back to the topics, before we get into the scenario we're looking at today, and the reason I am wearing my beautiful dystopian USA flag-ish inspired T-shirt. I want to talk about a comment which has arrived on part 1. Now, Daniel actually did write a reply to this, but it didn't get saved on YouTube for some reason. I'm not sure why.
User error.
Okay, that's been nice and avoiding mentioning that.
I forgot to click send or upload or whatever the actual button is.
Yeah, but we thought we could sort of both respond to it, because I did a sort of, in an introduction to one of the videos I've edited and put together today, I did a little bit of a quick introduction, but I did mention that Daniel might want to respond. And so I thought I'd give Daniel the chance to respond. Because this is the comment from John Walkley on part 1 of this thing. It is worth reflecting on events which took place some 5 months later, when Great Britain and Japan almost came to blows over the blockading of the British concession in Tsingtao, where there were over 1,000 Britons, following the murder of a Japanese banker by 4 Chinese nationalists. The Foreign Office and Admiralty advised against sending a major naval force to the Far East, as our ability to blockade Germany in what was perceived to be an imminent war with Germany, to which was added pressure from the French, D'Alandia, to maintain British naval strength in the Mediterranean. The USA was also reluctant to force the issue, preferring to tighten trade relations. Japan was equally divided, and at that time the alliance with Germany and Italy had not been totally finalised. As a result, the 4 Chinese were handed over and were executed. Your assumption of Australian, Dutch, French support is highly optimistic. In the event that gunfire were to have been exchanged, wiser heads would have prevailed, and British policy of appeasement, despite the inevitability of war, was to buy time.
So,
right, I'm going to let Daniel start off first, and then I'm going to, join, because I've already said a little bit.
So, we have a very, very dynamic situation diplomatically and internationally in the period 1938 to September 1939. I think that it was, although it's very difficult because everyone has changed their memoirs in light of things, but I'm not convinced that Chamberlain's Peace in Our Time in Munich was really believed by all that many people. And I think there was a growing recognition and a growing sense of things that that war was coming, and that actually Hitler was becoming viewed as just very rapacious. Now, the situation at the end of January is that you have Germany, which is struggling to incorporate the bits of what had been Czechoslovakia into itself. Quite a few of whom I think didn't want to be Czech, didn't want to find themselves as Germans.
Mm-hmm.
You've got the Italians kicking off in the Mediterranean against the French a bit, but the Italians don't have a huge amount there. You have Germany still dependent on Russia, or Soviet Union, sorry, for a lot of their trade and goods.
And Britain and France.
And Britain and France. So they are not in a position of strength. And the Germans struggled really to get ready for war in September. That's the first time they went to war. Bearing in mind, other countries are going to war over border skirmishes across April and March. You've got Hungary invading someone else. I've lost track. But Hungary went to war with one of its neighbours. Italy invaded Albania.
Was it Bulgaria?
Could be. Or it was some of the Rump Czech Republic. I can't. Possibly. It was very messy.
Yeah,
in Europe.
Basically,
and you but in that time you get two. Sorry, I found my notes.
Yeah, okay.
You get at least two wars going on around this time anyway. You have what else is going on? You've got the Germans have agreed the anti-Comintern pact with the Japanese, ultimately saying we're going to ultimately try and smash the Soviet Union, but the Soviet Union is still at war with Japan effectively with these border skirmishes, and is currently in a position of weakness because they have lost the last battle.
Yeah.
So
and they're building up to the second battle.
They're building up to the Battle of Kakin-Gol.
Yeah.
Which will go on and happen. So really, the Germany. So what you've actually got at that point is a weaker Germany, an Italy that people did not take Italy all that seriously even at that point. And the
trouble is, again, we're talking about events in January 1913, how they would have rippled on. And I think the thing is, again, he's raising up events in June.
Yeah.
And in June,
very different.
It's a different world. But also, and this is what I would add. I'm sorry, but the British are looking at 1,000 Britons being blockaded over 4 Chinese people who murdered a Japanese banker. In the nicest way, no one's going to go to war under those scenarios for those China. Why would Britain go to war for those 4 Chinese nationalists who've murdered the Japanese banker? A, they've committed murder, and B, it's not really something that the British government can go, you know what, to the British people, we're going to go to war because we want to protect some murderers.
Oh, also worth saying, the British diplomats did get assurances that they would be neither tortured nor executed before handing them over.
Yes, they got as much as you can with a diplomatic assurance.
Yeah.
And of course it didn't count for naught.
Yeah, of course it counted for nothing. And it was a very different thing because the British at that stage, the international legations were acting as the they were basically where the Chinese resistance were hiding because they knew it would be harder, because there were actually separate police jurisdictions in the different areas, but it was a capital crime. Now, the scenario we're giving is that the Japanese have actually sunk a British ship in front of the Royal Navy. Probably, not certain, probably killing some of the sailors.
Yeah.
This is a world of difference.
Then they've gone and attacked a British warship after it's gone and got another ship for compensation. And the British have then started carrying these things have escalated up. Another point I would like to get to is the fact he says that in the event that gunfire were to have been exchanged, wiser heads would have prevailed. I often see this phrase go round the world. I am not sure. I have yet to find an event where I can point to that happening, unless you have a larger power who's large enough to be able to go to those 2 nations, stop it. No, or I will come in and beat up both of you.
Yeah.
And the problem is, in the world at this time, in terms of naval terms, maybe in terms of some military terms, Britain and Japan are at least 2 of the top 3 largest powers in the world, militarily. As many weaknesses as they have, as many issues, they are 2 of the 3 biggest ones. And the third one is America, and there isn't enough difference between any of them that any one of them is the biggest. In fact, arguably, arguably the one who's the biggest would be one of the ones who'd be involved in January 1939. Please note we're saying this is for January 1939. So who is going to turn around to them and go, you have to forgive each other and play nicely? Mm-hmm. Who are these wiser heads when they are dealing with an affront to their own nation, when they're dealing with, and you've got the racial stereotypes on both sides and all this feeding, and also to an extent, the British would like a war. A war in the Far East is something Britain's been preparing for about officially for the last 15 or so years.
Yeah. And yes, the Singapore strategy sponsored by Tiger Beer.
Mhm.
Actually, but not. If they want to give us money, please do. I also like Heineken. I have some of that as well somewhere.
Yeah.
It's very different. This is before the Singapore strategy is dropped. This is before the people are saying we can't do this because Europe is not looking like it's going to blow up in that same way. And then you get to June and suddenly Germany's invaded the rump bits of Czechoslovakia and is making menacing noises at Romania and Poland.
Yeah.
And Britain's making promises to them and is kicking itself for the for what happened to Czechoslovakia.
Yeah.
Italy's invaded a couple of places. Is invaded Albania.
Basically, you have a very different world in January than you have in June, and that's what this is based off. And I'm sorry, John. I wish there was the wiser heads that prevail in the world. I really wish it was that scenario, but my study of history has. I have never found those wiser heads.
No.
I have found voices who talk and who claim to be, who want peace and all these things. It's very rare they seem to prevail. As I said, scenarios is if there's a bigger power who can go no. And you look at the Falklands War, where a bigger power did try to say no. America did try to negotiate. They did try shuttle diplomacy. They did all sorts of things. It didn't stop it.
And I mean, and to stop things once the bullets have started flying and there are some bodies.
Very difficult. Especially if they're British bodies.
Yeah.
That's the trouble. And he's quite right. British policy appeasement, despite the inevitable war, was to buy time. It was. But it was mostly to buy time in Europe for a European war, which was expected to be very different than a war in the Far East.
The war against Japan had been well planned out and was the same as it had been from 1919 when Jellicoe went out.
Pretty much.
Was it Jellicoe who did that tour?
Yeah, and
the Empire
did some time as governor of New Zealand, didn't he, at some point?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, he basically does it, and the war in the East, remember, is going to make use of a lot of the Indian Army and all these sort of things. It is, it's very focused on using the full of empire to fight it.
Yep, and we also have the other thing is it's the perfect British scenario, a bit like the Peninsular War and the wars against France.
Yeah.
In that Britain can use navy to cut off Japan and make them.
So its economy will probably be pretty much unaffected. So it'll still be trading quite happily.
Yep. So there's no Japanese trade, which they're pretty dependent on, but British trade is fine. And
also, to an extent, diplomatically, the war against Japan does allow Britain to do a hard pass on things in Europe if it wants to, with just the thing the Allies going, look, we're already fighting one major war, we don't want to pick another one.
Yeah. Equally, it's also a great excuse. I mean, once you're actually at war with somebody, it's a great excuse to up your spending on other things as well.
Yes, and suddenly you're ignoring treaties and building stuff, and everyone else goes, oh, you've stopped buying by the treaties. Well, of course we have. We're at war.
Yeah.
Can do all sorts of things. And and the last one, Australian, Dutch and French support is highly optimistic. Well, Australia is part of the Empire and part of the Commonwealth. And to an extent, the Dutch and French support, in my mind, and Daniel can say if he disagrees with me, is contingent on them trying to defend their interests in the area, because if they don't support the British, the Japanese will come for them next. Australia is even more exposed now, because it's not her territories or her old holdings. She is part of the British Empire. Her shield is the Royal Navy. If that shield is under attack,
then you end up with Darwin getting bombed.
Yeah. And Australia understand this at the time.
Yeah,
they really do understand this.
And if you move through, I mean, when New Zealand and Australia were pumping manpower into the very Eurocentric earlier part of the Second World War, this was with Churchill's absolute cast iron guarantee that there will be no circumstance under which Singapore will be allowed to fall.
Yes.
Until it falls.
Yes, but he put in Churchill's defence, he does put a lot of troops and a lot of generals there, and he expects them to do their job.
Yes. It's got... It gets complicated. I mean, you know, once you are fighting a war, that's one of the other things that happens is stuff happens.
Yes, and sometimes people who look perfectly reasonable commanding officers and perfectly sensible logical officers turn out to not be. Yeah. And also sometimes prime ministers make big statements on where they're sending battleships where they really shouldn't.
Yes, especially...
Battleships should have been in the Indian Ocean ready to respond. Yes. Cruisers forward in the China station ready to prosecute trade.
Well, you also have the problem that I think Churchill thought he understood naval matters because he'd been the First Lord of the Admiralty.
Right.
Yeah. Which he failed to recognise was a political appointment. And his main contributions... Oh, you've gone quiet.
In his mind, he was Admiralissimo or something like that.
Oh, you're very, very quiet.
Very quiet. I do not know why. Let me find out.
In the meantime, I will talk. Churchill's main contributions in the First World War as First Sea Lord were to Gallipoli and inventing the tank.
And that was definitely...
they were good things. Well...
The volume better now?
A little bit. Still quite quiet.
Why?
No.
I'll turn myself up a bit.
Oh, better.
That better?
Yeah. I mean, Gallipoli was a disaster, and they reinforced disaster for far too long there, definitely. But it did highlight that actually things had moved on from the days when you could just do a cutting out expedition, and showed that you really couldn't even get away with the stuff you did during the Boxer Rising, 10, 15 years before, with a landing party against somebody who actually had a machine gun.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. But going back, yes, we have Australia actually probably more agitating for a war, if it's going to happening this way round. And it's a huge amount of the British strategy, actually. The British strategies were fighting in the Far East, possibly fighting in the Med, then maybe fighting the Germans, and things kind of go in the wrong order for them.
Basically, they were hoping war with Japan, then war with Italy, then war with Germany.
Yeah. Oh, the other element that's very Napoleonic is, of course, Britain would be able to fund the forces of the Republican Chinese quite merrily to actually do a lot of the fighting.
Oh, yeah. Expect them to be bankrolling them something chronic.
Yeah. In the same way as the sort of Portuguese and Spanish and other people.
And as said, I wouldn't be surprised if, maybe not even fully join the alliance, but certainly potentially Condor Legion and other things like that, if you have the Germans and the Italians get involved in China, purely from the point of view of not wanting the Brits and the French to get too much back. And it's one of the interesting things is that while they're involved fighting in Spain, all these things, the Germans and Italians are quite happily distracted to an extent. They do a few small things, but they don't do as much when they're invested in Spain. So getting to invest in a combat in the middle in China, a land war in Asia is great for distracting people for a long time.
Also, the Americans of the mid-60s to early to mid-70s tell us.
And the Soviet Union of fighting in Afghanistan.
Well, Afghanistan's something special. I mean...
Afghanistan is special.
Yeah.
Someday
Afghanistan's
we might have...
where empires go to die.
Alexander the Great did okay there.
He died when he was coming back from there.
Yeah. But the thing is, he did okay when he was there.
You can do okay briefly, and then as soon as you turn your back, suddenly it's Afghanistan again.
Yeah.
It's this problem of the Afghans. Anyway, that's not very naval. It's landlocked.
Yeah.
Although quite a lot of my friends who are in the Navy have gone there.
Yes, the same with a lot of my friends from the Navy have gone there.
It's really quite dusty and landlocked, as was Iraq.
Yeah, but it turns out naval personnel are quite good at adapting to what they call a land sea.
Yeah, but as one friend put it, that's not what she signed up for. She signed up to go around the Caribbean in a big grey war canoe.
Yep, that sounds like a good thing to do. So, leaving that the one side, and I hope Mr. Let me check his name again.
John Walkley.
John Walkley, I hope that's answered your questions, and thank you very much for the comment.
Yeah. Appreciate you putting thought into it and watching.
Yeah.
These things had occurred to us. They are answered, but, having lost my what I typed out to you because I forgot to hit submit.
Oh.
It would have been briefer, but never mind.
We had fun.
Yeah.
So, let's get on today's scenario. And this is the final scenario. And this scenario is basically...
Oh, you've gone quiet again.
Why have I gone quiet again?
Oh, I've no idea.
Let me see. Right. Oh. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to move the microphone closer to me. If at any point I go too loud, tell me.
I will. Don't worry. Although I have a tendency to be too loud as well.
What I also find interesting is I set this microphone up for XSplit and the recording system for that. And then I go to Skype, and Skype auto starts to play around with things.
Yeah.
And then we have the fun of going back to XSplit, and I have to reconfigure all that stuff. So, now, this scenario is one, to an extent, Daniel was less keen on at the beginning, but I think is now rather interested in it. Mainly because it's a bit wacky doodle.
Yeah.
But, okay, so the explanation I'm giving, because really to get it past the very structural historical things there, and so this is possibly the least historically connected in a way one, but it's one of the ones which is kind of interesting to look at from perspective of if it happens, how bad the situation goes. And basically, I wanted there to be a scenario, because we've been looking at all these scenarios. There isn't much of a chance of Japan in this part of 1939 having any chance of winning. If America's not supporting the Allies and Italy and Germany join in, if they did join in fast enough, there might be a chance. But if they join in, as they probably would be a few months down the line, after perhaps Japan's already fought and lost the main battle, that's a very different scenario then. So, what you're then left with, okay, so under what scenario does Japan have much of a chance? The only scenario where they have much of a chance is if America signs up alongside them. So how would America under what circumstances would America sign up alongside them? And we have chosen the circumstance where space bats.
Yeah.
That's what we're using.
It's alien space bats. We just can't see a way that this the US is basically split between FDR, who is pro-Chinese, pro-British-ish, anti-Nazi, things like that, and people who just want to be totally isolationist. So neither of those parties is going to be itching to go to war on the side of Japan in real life.
Our theory is that World War II in this scenario, and the alien space bats are trying to influence it, so it's the biggest conflagration as possible to wipe out the human race, because World War III is going to be against the alien space bats. But don't worry, whatever happens, we'll win that, because I think we're still going to invent rock and roll, and nothing damages a bat more than loud noise. So we can all be thankful we'll be saved by Elvis.
There will still be HMS Warspite because she has plot armor.
Yes, Warspite has plot armor, so her and Elvis will probably win the World War III versus the Space Bats. So we don't have to worry about the Space Bats as history goes on.
The other option is we go with the Trojan War option, which is Zeus feels that the world is overpopulated and so decides to set a war to try and thin the herd. Apparently that was the explanation.
The worry is with some people keep talking, the way some people keep talking about overpopulation these days from the perspective of the Earth. I do worry that some humans are going to have that idea at some point.
Oh, they had it. It's just been extremely politically incorrect to keep having those thoughts since 1945 when we saw what happened with that.
Yes, and
yeah.
The other point my other point I usually make is so far what we've managed to do is things like dwarf wheat, etc., have come up, which, usually when we are running at these things, we find a way to better utilize the resources we have. And it's when you start treating resources as finite things that you get into trouble and you get into wars. Yes, they are finite in terms of they will run out, so we need to find something else to use or some better way to use them. But it's not so much a thing of there's only a fixed amount of this thing, so we must guard our portion of it jealously and protect it from other people. Can't let anyone else have anything.
What we need to do, though, is find the solution to that before too many people end up dying in wars due to the
lack of water and lack of food.
Because what we do keep having, we are not a closed system. We keep getting lots of extra energy from the sun.
Yes.
This is not a closed loop model. It is not a closed system.
I keep having to explain this to people so often, and they go, "Oh, we get this. I was like, and I said to people, "You do realise there are still fossil fuels still forming beneath the Earth? I'd rather we didn't use them because of the pollution they do, but they're still forming."
I want to stop using oil because it's more useful for plastic.
Yeah.
But you can make a lot of these things from biopolymers and things, and you can use alcohol as a fuel and things. We just need we just need to be thinking differently.
And believe it or not, actually, quite a lot of that thinking, the reason I've brought this in, because me and Dan have had this sort of bit of this conversation before, is quite a lot of that thinking would actually go into this war scenario. Because you would have America and Japan versus probably Europe and their empire around the world. And it's as much as you can make an even match as you can think of it, really, if we start going through it scenario. And so quite a lot of these things which we are now talking about could well have been properly pushed for and developed under those circumstances. Because it's amazing how wars change. Because if World War II, as it was looking for, you had America, which was a huge gasoline power, a huge amount of fuel, so it was able to do it that way. Britain had supplies, yes, thanks to the Persian Gulf, but they were slightly more difficult to get to. So they were starting to look into other supply options.
And you had Germany and Japan who had neither and were actually, in no small part, going to war to try and get.
Yeah.
Same for Italy.
Yeah. So in this scenario, poor Romania is probably lost again.
Yeah. Romania isn't going to do well. You're the only oil-producing place, really, along with a few bits of Poland, who also don't generally do well in these things.
But in this scenario, Poland might well join the Allies. We'll talk it through and we'll work out where it goes. So
it's the way that Poland possibly ends up with the strongest fleet in the Baltic.
Yeah.
A major naval power in the Baltic.
We can all be slightly scared of what will happen if the Polish Navy were pissed off against the Americans and unleashed in World War II. Because let's be honest, both like making flashing signals at their enemy to tell them who they are. So that would be a battle where the flashes would be, you'd be not sure if the flashes were shells or signal lamps.
I would not put it past the Poles to work out a firing sequence that would actually spell out rude things for their volley fires.
I wouldn't be. I was thinking that. Okay, so
So
the idea is basically the Friends of Germany and the anti-British group have somehow taken power in US elections, maybe by selectively killing people. Probably they've had to kill off people like, including Admiral King will have had to be killed off, because whilst he didn't like the British, going to war versus them was not on his high priority lists.
No, because
his fleet wasn't ready, and
Yeah.
he would have made noise.
Yeah. And the US Navy at this stage is not ready.
No.
As with the Japanese, we are talking nearly 3 years of really high-pitched development
And building.
But also, and R&D between now and the Pacific War we all know and love, that ended, say, when we were recording
it's not to say that the Royal Navy's ready in 1939. It's just it's got two advantages: mass and mass. It's got longevity, and it's it's been pursuing a numbers policy shamelessly the whole way through. The others have been pursuing quality of ships. The Royal Navy's been pursuing quantity.
I think the other big advantage the RN has, possibly two advantages, are in terms of their thinking. Now, fundamentally, the RN and the British way of the overall British way of conducting war is not fair.
Mm-hmm.
The British love of fair play stops when the bullets or longbow arrows start flying, and we get nasty.
To be fair, our love of fair play stops a lot earlier than things like that, considering some of the stories actually might. I'm going to say the ladies in my friends group have told me about some of the things they've done in pursuit of their partners, and some of the tricks the guys have played on other guys to try and get the girls. Yeah, it basically all's fair in love and war in British scenarios.
Yeah. So Britain recognised the weakness of Japan in terms of the dependence on maritime trade, and was set up to exploit that. You've got a large chunk of the UK submarine force already deployed there. You've got the town cruisers, totally not a commerce raider gov honest poachers to turn gamekeeper or vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
Designed to do that. Now, the other thing that Britain's got is they experienced Jutland. They went through Jutland. The Americans and the Japanese didn't, and both want a Jutland. They're both thinking, I want a big navy, I want a big battle. I want a big battle. I want a big battleship battle. The British are going, we tried that. Our battle cruisers blew up. Fortunately, we've got rid of BT, but nonetheless, that's too close to being a fair fight.
Unfortunately, his legacy of being First Sea Lord has lived on. That's why the Fleet Air Arm was part of another service. We'll leave that to one side.
Yes. So, now there's kind of two ways a scenario like this can go. One of them I really don't think is fun to think through, because actually I don't think it gives Britain a chance, and that is that the Germans and Italians and possibly some other, if they've got some allies and things, kick off in Europe, whether deliberately or whether just through lucky chance, at about the same sort of time as the Americans join in, as Britain has pushed herself, along with France to some extent, into a war in the Far East.
Yeah,
I don't see that having a happy ending for Britain. Britain will be too stretched. So we're going to have Germany and Italy either neutral and staying out of it because they're busy trying to sort out whatever they've managed to gobble up so far, or whatever, or possibly even joining in, which gives us the Deutschland class to play with. We found
As
it last time.
We can. I think if the Germans and the Italians decide to join in, which would be my suspicion, because okay, you already see the issues between Hitler and Mussolini, who are never really as bosom buddies, despite Hitler sending someone to rescue Mussolini in the end. It's more a useful friendship than a actual. It's a useful frenemy rather than a useful friendship. You have Franco, who is technically supposed to be a fascist power, but given the choice, no, I'm not genuinely taking part in World War II. I can't. I'd be too much of a drain on your resources.
Yeah.
And the trouble is, for Germany and Italy, both of them see themselves as being the premier fascisty power. So here's the problem. A fascisty of some hue America is not going to be second fiddle to Germany and Italy under any circumstance.
Yeah. The other issue
so it's their egos come into play.
And then there's, I mean, God, but I hate trying to in any way put myself inside the mind of Hitler, but he appears to have had these bizarre racial purity concepts. And if you've got Britain and the Netherlands at war with the Japanese, now I've never quite worked out what his views on the French were, but he certainly appeared to have these bizarre notions that Britain and Scandinavia and the Netherlands were somehow Aryan brothers of this bizarre concept of
he certainly does like to try
Germany.
and talk about that phraseology, yes.
Yeah. So he would have it would have been a way for him to try and get them on side and maybe create more of a breach between them and Poland. And
yes.
And distract them that way, because the reason for going to war with France, well, actually, he didn't necessarily want to go to war with France. He wanted to go east. He turned west because we kind of forced him to, and he needed to sort out the west so we could concentrate on the east. But he always wanted to go east.
He always wanted Liberation.
He wanted lots of things. I recently watched or listened to a podcast and things by people saying he wasn't mad.
No, he wasn't. He was, unfortunately, he was a SHIT. He was.
I think he probably
many things, but I don't. At the beginning,
I think he was personality disordered, not mad. There's a very, very marked difference. I think he had a personality disorder. I haven't quite worked out which one because I'm far from a psychiatrist. But yeah. Anyway, we've drifted off topic again. And
yes, we have, but we're skirting around the topic. So we're not quite sure how they've achieved control, but they have. And let's say in the Christmas of 1938, so it's not too long ago, they have managed to get power.
It's a swing on the back of the 1938 midterm elections that actually FDR did quite badly in.
Yeah.
In real life, his policies.
Didn't they hold a huge, massive rally in New York at some point? This period, the American equivalent of a Nazi party. They hold a
Weren't they called the American Union of Fascists and I don't know.
Something.
Honestly, I don't know because I don't care that much about them. Because
we're just look. We had to come with a plausible reason for why America would actually come in on the side of Japan, and this was the only. As we said, it was this small group of really annoying people get supported by alien space bats.
Yeah. The key thing here is alien space bats, and then a lot of Americans
get mind washed by sonic waves.
Yeah. So, and if they nip Casus Belli, then if they continue trying to trade with Japan, they are going to run into British-led embargo. So
And yeah, British are probably going to start impounding ships.
yeah,
Or at least trying to turn them around, and then probably impounding them if they continue on, and then they'll go to Admiralty courts and they'll dispute the decisions.
yeah,
Or Britain might. You see, the thing is, Britain would probably do what it did in the First World War and had done in the Napoleonic Wars, which is capture the ship, buy the cargo, send the ship back.
yeah.
And the thing is, most neutrals were prepared to accept that. If you get pissed off with it, though.
Mm. So now,
Or if there are some Japanese sailors or something trying to get home from America from their Japanese ships on American ships, and Britain stops it. Rather like what happens with Germany in the Assamamar incident,
yes,
where the British almost end up at war again with Japan another time, January 1940.
yeah. So we have war.
Yeah,
we have war. Now, the fun part. How's it going to go? What's going to happen?
Well, it all depends on how quickly the Americans end up joining the war. My